Black Basta had been basically flooding victim email boxes with just benign spam messages, and then after a few days, contacting the victim over Microsoft Teams.
When you're logging things, what is actionable? If we're seeing, some kind of VNC service or some kind of remote access deal, let's alert on that and trigger. And maybe it's benign, but let's start tracking that down and figuring out what we can trust and not trust.
Welcome to the Talos Threat Perspective. Phishing attacks surged last quarter, accounting for half of all initial access methods in Cisco Talos incident response cases, which is a 40% rise from last quarter. Meanwhile, ransomware shadow loomed larger with a 20% rise. However, most of these attacks were actually stopped before the encryption or extortion phase could begin, and these near misses provide a really good insight into what actually works when defending against ransomware. On today's show, we will get into those near misses. We'll also dissect a massive vishing campaign that has been wreaking havoc over the last few months. And we'll explore what tools attackers are using to gain remote access and why those tools look so familiar. To get the full Cisco Talos quarterly trends report, head to blog.talosintelligence.com. Now, the rise in phishing attacks has a lot to do with a widespread phishing campaign that accounted for over 60% of all of the phishing activity that we saw. Now, it hit a number of organizations very hard, and one of our incident responders who worked closely on this campaign is here to tell us what he saw firsthand.
Black Basta had been basically flooding victim email boxes with just benign spam messages, and then after a few days, contacting the victim over Microsoft Teams, or we saw on several occasions 800 numbers. If the victim didn't actually use Microsoft Teams, they would use a just a random 800 number and contact the victim by phone. So they were basically initiating the vishing through that mechanism, prompting a quick assist session, let's get that right, um, where the adversary would then interact with the user's workstation or system for a little bit, install a persistence mechanism, and then say, "Yep, thanks for your time, thanks for your help, we'll talk again soon," or hopefully not.
We also saw that the adversary did quite a bit of reconnaissance in advance of the attack.
So they would know, they're impersonating somebody who is a known member of the IT department. They would know maybe a little bit about them as a person or what their role is in the environment.
So, for organizations, what are the key things to be aware of with this type of phishing campaign?
I always think that if you get to a point where you're talking about accounts, passwords, leveraging things that could be used for credentialed access or anything like that, again, you get into the concept of, hey, make sure that you can make a call out to a known number within your organization, right? Like so that you can say, okay, I'll do that. Let me call and they'll route me to you via the help desk or whatever, right? So that then you're in control because if your IT department is needing you to do something, and you make that initial call internally, I think that helps. Then we're all human, right? Like, and we're all overloaded, and these things happen. Plus, the adversaries, like you said, are very good at the social engineering aspects, right? It's really a great skill, and so a properly rolled out MFA that's done well is going to help a lot.
So, that phishing campaign and just the sheer amount of social engineering that we're seeing in Cisco Talos incident response cases, it's just a reminder that even if your organization has all of the technical defenses in place, attackers very much count on people for entry.
It's just so prevalent because it's working. And the adversaries know that, the threat actors know that. So they're going to continue to try to iterate. I actually got a text message the other day from a recruiter from Randstad. I was like, wow, I've never had a recruiter text me on my phone before. And then I realized they wanted me to contact them on Telegram, and the Telegram wasn't anywhere close to what the actual recruiter's name was. So I guess this is going to be the next wave now. We're going to be seeing recruitment type SMS, people wanting to reach out on Telegram or whatever.
And of course, attackers are now very much using large language models to fine tune their scams, changing tones, adjusting phrasing, and really tailoring their message to sound even more convincing.
The other thing that's interesting is the colloquial language, right? Like not just regional dialect, but young versus old. And you can train your models and have separate models for different styles, right? And so in my opinion, like, you could take your instruct and over time tune it more towards IT professionals, and so it kind of has that lingo versus another one where you might have different ones, and I've done that on occasion. I don't know if y'all occasionally when I do EVCs, I'll do it, and I'll give myself a minute to research a person and a minute to create an email and a website for them to land on, and I can do that, and I'll occasionally do it in a different language or whatever, and you'll be like, "Make this a little more colloquial, make it a little more conversational," and they can change the body of the email from something that seems kind of rigid and very, you can still see that it's LLM, but over time, if you keep doing that, and I've done these so many times now that the model is starting to get really good.
Now, that all sounds pretty bad, but what if, as Bill says, attackers are trying to tailor things towards IT professionals? Could this mean the end of IT jargon because it all sounds too much like a phishing campaign? Just imagine for 1 second a world without acronyms. We'd have to change the name of the show, I guess. Anyway, while ransomware cases increased this quarter, 75% of those cases were actually classified as pre ransomware. Basically, these had all the hallmarks of a ransomware attack, from the initial access through to attempts at defense evasion, lateral movement, all those kind of things. But the attack was stopped before the final encryption could be deployed. Now, that's good news, but the early warning signs of ransomware are happening more frequently, according to our reporting. So, by examining how threat actors are establishing footholds and escalating their access, we can gain a clearer picture of which defenses are working.
Ensuring that you have segmented networks, it's not so flat across things. Make sure that you don't gain access laterally between networks that don't need to have access, right? The engineering people don't need access to payroll, et cetera, right? So that's like one of those base important steps. Beyond that, I think the other thing that's happened is that we are, as a community, getting better about um, not just the patch levels and stuff like that, but understanding that that some of the TTPs that we're seeing across here are being done in terms of like leveraging bypassing EDR, which we've seen so much of in these accounts and stuff. It's understanding where the threat landscape is moving. I think some of that is also helping because the other thing that we see, and this has gone on for a while, but we see that Venn diagram closing, right, where we have cybercrime and nation state, and they were very far apart. And now it's kind of just a circle, and so a lot of these TCPs are just getting kind of recycled, which is good for us in terms of, hey, we've seen this, right? And as the analysts, especially the junior or new and career folks that are looking at the IDS logs and looking at the host based logs and stuff, they're seeing it and saying, hey, I have seen these techniques. And so they're still valid and working across the landscape, but I think some of that pre versus, "Oh, no, we're hit," is coming in that regard.
Our final topic today is remote access. Now, the use of commercial and open source remote access tools continue to rise this quarter, featuring in half of all Cisco Talos incident response engagements, and that is about a 10% rise. Attackers leveraged a broad set of platforms, including Splashtop, TeamViewer, AnyDesk, LogMeIn, Quick Assist, and more. Now, this growing diversity highlights a consistent tactic, blending in with legitimate IT activity.
One of the interesting things that this quarter's threat trends report sort of starts to allude to is adversaries are starting to use commercial applications across the entire kill chain. You know, when we hear things as incident responders, as threat intelligence personnel, as just blue teamers, we hear a lot of these terms that we assume are rote malware. Just, there's somebody out there who's getting paid on the dark web to make this malware. They're publishing it, they're selling it, whatever. But when we think about things like Cobalt Strike, obviously, commercial application. What brought this to my attention was HR Sword. We saw this quarter, we saw HR Sword being used to disable EDR. in my head, perhaps some naivete here, I'm thinking, okay, that's a new type of malware. Let me look into that. That's actually a legitimate application that a Chinese manufacturer makes for managing systems and things like that. Remco's Rat is another one that I think, okay, in my head, Remco's, that must be, malware. Again, there's an actual organization who maintains this software for a legitimate reason, and the adversaries are abusing that.
So, how can companies spot when a tool is being leveraged by an adversary and not a legitimate user?
I think it depends on this how savvy the adversary is. Sometimes it can be very challenging. I will say if AnyDesk is executing out of your music folder, it's probably not a legitimate user in that case. That's probably going to be the adversary. But if they manage to stage it, or even if they install it themselves, if they have local admin privileges and they can install the application, that's going to make it really challenging to understand what's good and what's not. So asset management, network baselining, system baselining, that kind of stuff is really gonna be helpful with that type of detection.
I would say beyond that, in terms of defending, first, like I said, it's following the, blogs and the threat research in the landscape so that you understand and also so that you get the IOCs. Like, we provided all the IOCs in clear text always at Talos because we care, and so you can copy them into your environment, right? And beyond that, it's, figuring out from those things what to leverage in terms of when you're logging things, what is actionable? If we're seeing some kind of VNC service or some kind of remote access deal, let's alert on that and trigger it. And maybe it's benign, but let's start tracking that down and figuring out what we can trust and not trust.
Now, this quarter's attack trends really do highlight that early detection, user awareness, and some blooming good monitoring really do make an impact. For a deeper look at some of the threats that we saw, download Talos's quarterly trends report now at blog.talosintelligence.com. Thank you for watching.